Welcome back. The Pan-African Parliament has held its 10th conference of speakers of African National Assemblies and Senates in Johannesburg. The parliamentarians from the continent and Inter-parliamentary Union focused on the AU's theme of Year of Refugees, Returnees and Internally Displaced Persons in Africa towards durable solutions to forced displacements. They also debated implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. And joining us now to talk about the PAP's function and functionability is Dr. Phenyo Butale, who is the Parliament's Monetary and Financial Affairs Committee member. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much, and good evening to your viewers.
Perhaps let's just start with the theme that the president of the PAP started with, that of unity of the continents and the people who are trying to sabotage it. Did he refer to anybody in particular or any entities in particular he thought that were trying to undercut Africa's development?
Well, I think it is important. It is important for us to understand what the Pan-African Parliament is about. You would know that the Pan-African Parliament was established back in the days and around 2001 following the adoption of a protocol by heads of state. But the idea was to have a voice of African people, and that's why you have 5 parliamentarians from each country coming and making sure that the voices of the voiceless Africans is heard. So what happens at the Pan-African Parliament, and I think it is the reason why you would have the president speaking about unity, is that we're trying to forge some sort of unity moving forward, some sort of uniformity in terms of our approaches to trade, our approaches to laws. That's why right now the Pan-African Parliament, does an advisory role to the AU. That's why there was, another protocol known as the Constitutive Act or the Malabo Protocol, seeking to give the Pan-African Parliament legislative power so that we can come up with model laws that can aid Africa, so that Africa can speak with one voice in all.
And perhaps let me just jump in there and talk about how you laid the groundwork for what the Pan-African Parliament is, the fact that it's a consultative assembly, the genesis that it's undergone. But people are saying that despite all of that, it's still toothless. It's still not able to properly reflect the voices of those African people that you talk about.
Yes, I think that's why why there has been a movement towards giving the parliament legislative powers. That's why the speakers, one of the issues that they discussed was ensuring that they push their national parliaments, their governments, so that they ratify. We need about 16 governments to ratify so that we can then have the legislative powers that the parliament needs. But the Pan-African Parliament has done a lot in terms of the coming up with model laws that have guided Africa's movement in terms of the tax area. For example, we have recently signed an MOU with the Africa Tax Forum, where we came up with a model law on to avoid double taxation and to ensure that we deal with issues of transfer pricing that has affected negatively African economies.
So again, I still go back to the fact that there is the intention, but that still has not happened. The fact that you make policy or you suggest policy directives to the African Union for their approval, that if you look at models such as the European Union, which is what you yourselves are modeled on, they have those legislative powers. What is stopping the Pan-African Parliament from enacting those? Well,
what is needed, first of all, as I said, is one of the things that was discussed by the speakers at the 10th Speakers Conference.
So what was the resolution?
The resolution was to go back now to their countries and talk to their governments and to their national parliaments to now expedite the ratification of this protocol. Because if you give the Pan-African Parliament legislative powers, then you can then begin to compare it to other regional parliaments such as the European Union. Right now, as I said, it's an advisory body, it plays a consultative role, and within the confines of the protocol as is now, I believe that the Pan-African Parliament has done relatively well, and I think that given these legislative powers, we can do better.
Okay, so we'll come back to the issue of whether it's done relatively well. You have two human rights lawyers from Cameroon there to plead their case before the African Union, saying that they're pleading with you to do something about criticism that has been laid at your feet, that you've been eerily silent on the issue of the crisis in Cameroon.
Well, you know, the Pan-African Parliament, as I said, operates within the confines of the powers that are given to it by the protocol as was adopted in 2001. And as I said, the Malabo Protocol or the Constitutive Act is not yet in force because not enough countries have ratified it. So I'm saying this because...
But what stops the Pan-African Parliament from speaking out strongly against it? The president, whom we've just seen pictures of,
yes.
There's some who are even making the accusations that because he's a member of President Paul Biya's ruling or governing party, this is partly why the PAP is silent on this issue.
Well, the PAP is, I do not think that it would be fair to say it's silent. The PAP discusses a lot of issues, issues of migration, issues of forced migration, issues of ensuring that we change the lifestyle, the situation of most of African people. And I think this matter, if placed on the floor of the Pan-African Parliament, it will be discussed. And
so you'd agree the issue of Cameroon, that there was an attempt to do that between yesterday and today, and those who did do that say they found no joy?
Well, I'm not aware. I'm not aware, first of all, whether such attempts were made. I don't know what procedures or processes they followed, but I would be sympathetic, naturally, to such cries. But as I say, you know, it is important that this forum that has to be the voice of African people needs to be seen to be providing an opportunity.
And I think that is the crux of the matter. It's not necessarily about enacting or implementing the laws, because you don't have those legislative powers, but being vocal enough on issues that African people feel that should be at the fore of parliamentarians who represent them. Corruption, the lack of functionability of the Pan-African Parliament. So if you are going to hurry up those protocols, ensure that they are ratified, which ones are you going to prioritize? I
think the first thing is that the Constitutive Act, the Malabo Protocol, let us as Africans give the Pan-African Parliament legislative powers, so that when we expect you know, the Pan-African Parliament to do that which it's supposed to do, then we have granted them all the powers that they deserve. So I believe that right now the Pan-African Parliament is doing that which they can under the confines of the Act as it exists.
So again, your president called on you to go beyond that which you can. I'm asking again, which are the protocols that you think are of imminent danger if they're not ratified? Imminent danger in terms of you not meeting your mandate?
The starting point is to give the Pan-African Parliament legislative powers. If you do that, then the Pan-African Parliament will champion issues such as the Africa trade area, issues such as ensuring that there is free movement in Africa, issues such as you know, uniform tax laws in Africa to deal with issues of transfer pricing, as I've said. So right now, the fact that the Pan-African Parliament is consultative and advisory, we are unable to do as Africans expect.
What were the resolutions on the free trade agreement, the implementation thereof? That was something that was on the table for debate and discussion.
Yes.
What was the consensus? Well,
the consensus was that it is important that African countries do, you know, ratify, do take and infuse in their policies as this Africa trade area, as was agreed by the heads of states, to make sure that our policies are in tandem, our policies are move in the same direction as Africa, and to ensure that we move towards facilitation of free movement through an Africa passport. And this was more, the speakers and the members of parliament were in agreement that if Africa is to move in the direction that we want it to move, we need to facilitate and expedite the adoption of this
So there obviously has been, according to those who are breathing a sigh of relief, ratification at very strategic points, but the issue of African integration, some have made the observation that there are countries who are rather more nationalistic in their approaches and would rather focus on that. South Africa has been fingered, Botswana, Ghana, and if you look at countries such as Egypt, Angola. How do you strengthen protocols towards African integration?
Well, I think one of the things that we made as an observation as part of the resolutions was that we need to ensure that there are some matters that are pending to do with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area and the protocols thereof. And the agreement was that we need now to focus on regulating these matters, to focus that and make sure that as states, African countries, we are able to now iron out whatever differences there is, because countries would have their own country positions, but what should be of interest at the end of the day is that which takes Africa to achieve the Africa Agenda 2063.
Were any of those highlighted today? What are still seen as stumbling blocks?
Well, the overarching focus is on achieving the Agenda 2063, which is making sure that we have an integrated and prosperous Africa that is driven by Africans. So whatever borders that divide us shouldn't be the basic or the main consideration. The main consideration is that which would make sure that we achieve this agenda that we have set for ourselves as Africans.
Okay, so just in terms of the long-term goal of the PAP itself being able to draft bills for submission to the AU, but not only draft submission, but making sure that they are pushed through by the various governments of those 55 member states. Where are you in that progress?
Well, one of the resolutions was, as I said, exactly that the speakers have now, and members of parliament, of course, have now agreed that it is important that we, within a short period of time, we need to push for the required 16 states.
What is the timeline?
The required 16 nations to now come in and ratify the protocol. So they spoke about ensuring that the ratification happens before December 2019, and that means that before the end of this year. So once you have enough countries having ratified, then you would have legislative powers, and I believe that then the Pan-African Parliament will be able to be that which our forebearers will be able to. So should you fail to
achieve that, what is the next step available to you?
Well, I guess Africa would have failed itself, because it is upon each member country, including mine, to ratify, because even now my country hasn't ratified. So it is up to us as members of parliament and as speakers to go back to our countries and do the lobbying, the necessary lobbying, so that we are able to ratify and meet this agreed deadline.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Phenyo Butale from the PAP's Parliament's Monetary and Financial Affairs Committee. Well, that's it from us for this week. Do join us again, same time next week, Wednesday. From all of us here in Studio 11, do enjoy the rest of your evening of viewing. Good night.